chapter on 7 hills, Silt, a world built around women, Rome's forgotten half, the city of Rome, the height of its power, was home to perhaps 1 million people, a staggering of humanity in the ancient world, a merchant world, a metropolis of marble temples and mud-brick insulae, of triumphal arches and open sewers, of senators in white togas and slaves, bars to parts. Pass at once the history most untold about this city of the emperors and generals, the philosophers, and the senators whose names in Greece is Yimum. After their deaths, Julius Caesar, Augustus, Fusus, Darrow, Cicero, Arx, Begillus, B. Theodoriccio. These are the figures who have the imaginations of when flamed the Renaissance. Rome was also a city of women. Half its population was female. Harley was royally intended women was given rooms, and his skin was Hill, and rooms decorated with gold, decorated with jade. To the slave woman, the chamber pots of a middle-class household in a back district, Bisabura district. Between these extremes lived the wives of senators and merchants, the daughters of freedmen, the priestesses of the Vestal Order, the market women, sold vegetables and cloth at the forum, the midwives and healers, the tavern keepers and prostitutes, the mothers and widows, and daughters whose the lives sons have made up the Roman story. The Historia record written by and for men records only partially and sometimes reluctantly. This is the story of Roman women, not as appendages to male stories as of their own. It draws on the rich and varied evidence that Roman civilizes us, the legal texts and the funerary inscriptions and the prescriptions and the graffiti scratched on the walls of Pompeii, the medical writings of Mediterraneans and the satirical literature, remains of houses and ops and baths and temples, the portrait and and in Frisco. Am in Zelver of the Famed breathed in ancient world. Their story more varied and remarkable than the formal histories usually acknowledge the legal framework. What Roman law said. Oh, law say all about Roman men and menen, emikimen. Overmly, the J for men is that because them work was because excellent framework was simultaneously more restrictive and more moist expect in the earliest period of Roman history. Women lived under illegal inferior stands and the ass and sirut. The absolute household power of the male held head of the households, pater familias, over all members, ensign, Borıng, his wife, and daughters. Under the strictest application of these, a woman passed from the legal control of her father, to legal control of her husband. No independent legal, no capacity to own prompt in her own name, and no as a legal person independent of the man who, however, and this is the crucial qualification, Roman law at static, and the bat at static, and of Vince Larry insistent of legal theory by the late Republic. The strictest form of manus marriage, largely feus, fallenum aries, replaced by sigmanu marriage in Nach, and to woman did not pass into her husband's power, bar or legal power, but remained under the nominal authority of her own father. And crucially, when her father died, she became a relatively autonomous legal person known as a woman. A sweet European in the Puidu, property, conduct business, manage her and true fellowship. Subus. Sumalagarian, whose practical role had been reduced by legal evolution to a ceremonial function. This legal evolution produced by the Cincinnati a situation in which wealthy and well-connected role-connected Roman women had a degree of autonomy that that was remarkable by the standards of most things. That's that's sensitivities, and yes, the insensitivity of women in many later European civilizations. A rich widow, a richest widow, if the widow owned reach with her own wrist in her own name, conduct business through agents, lend money at interest, monuments, who she chose, the gap between the formal theorists and practical women of Hatchley functioning in Romans was substantial. Chapter Do Good Girlhood Education. Becoming a Roman woman, a Roman man. Philia, being a Roman girl was, from the moment of her birth, subject to the paterfamilias power of this, that he exercised over all his children the practice of infant exposure, placing an unwanted newborn outside, or to be taken by anyone who found it. Legal throughout Roman history. And the more exposed those boys, though the extent of this practice has been debated by modern scholars. What is clear is that birth of a girlie was the Merstra the Boyshev, then the birth of a boy. Often as Gorbiters, their frequently against daughters, worked against daughters. The girls survived their early childhood's interworld education. Was for the daughters of the upper classes. Inwardly impressive by ancient standards, Rome had no children will feces. Both boys and girls together, at least in the early years, were educated at home by Greek tutors, or in small private schools called ludi, where a teacher, a ludus magister, taught reading, writing, and the rudiments, The evidence for femalency in Roman says the subphrase, the loves of pious, of Bicris, of Bix, educated Bix, women who read and write themselves. They themselves. The letters of Cicero mention female correspondents who are clearly literate and in insular and rare inscriptions describe women as Jokta, Larnd, Rarnd, and interest, Chadnoon's intellectual accomplishment, rather than mere social convention. The upper-class Roman ethnic girls' biddles typical beyond basic literacy to a stop. The study of Greek, of their Greek, in their culture, in the Roman world, and to music, the lyre, and the sarara were instruments thence that a well-educated young woman was expected to play. Dancing was taught with the entertain then en thena sing tsako isosi esentatinas. A good entertainer. Social proposition. The ability to converse intelligently, te Bedritu pometatron, saith, seven twin perfecula pasha negociis urtal serves to Rome. The girl's education, marriage, the urine center of F-Euro. And the evidence suggests binge as mimomage. This was not universal. Studies, Reverend Mother Moritz, average funerary inscriptions, and other document evidence suggests the average age at first marriage for Roman women was more likely in the mid to late teens than at the legal minimum. But it was not uncommon for girls of the senatorial equestrian classes to be married or 13. Distinct than themselves. The marriage was arranged by the paterfamilias of the equestrians, primarily with the feelings of the young woman in the decision, Roman marriage law, like so much of Roman law, was more sophisticated than its basic framework might suggest. Consent was technically required. Analyze the recognized environments for a valid marriage. That is, in the man's parts, the men. Participation. The wedding ceremony itself. The wedding salameric was the papuk, the bride, at the center of a day of exceptional solemn devotion. The procession through the streets. The ceremony at the threshold of the new home, The ritual words, the formal element impede you. Ubito, Gaius, ego, Gaia. Square you are by the bride as crossed into her husband's house. These moments were the most formally acknowledged. Romi, backup Romi of the upper classes, typically, and the cared the clerus, with the clergy standing of his status and property. Divorce was remarkably easy in Rome. Their partage by absolved the marriage, the declaration without it needing proceeding. This ease of divorce be a builder Willisi of women inside many Mehmet is an elegant knowledges and imminence that wealthy women could accumulate. Men meant Roman upper-class women experienced marriage and a more fluctuating the Savers than their counterparts. In many later years they end. Multiple marriages were common among aristocracy. Cicero's wife Differentia was married at least twice, the daughter Tullia 3 times, the Empress Livia, who exercised more influence, Augustine was as Angsteinsmaris, a Mithras. The ancients had been previously married before her union with Augustus. Chapter 3, the Mistrona, mistress of the Thris, Uma et Lauso, Ife of the Roman wife, Rife the Romith, wife of the perfect wife, the Matrona. Was one of the most carefully constructed and most culturally powerfully Roman ideals in Roman civilization, and it shaped the lives, and it shaped the Roman women in every social class in ways both enabling and constraining. The ideal, the alm dearly must trust domestic to her husband and children, and been chillfold and of men the household, and industrious if spinning and weaving. She was modest in her public behavior, dignified in her bearing, and subordinate to her husband in the formal hierarchies of Roman social life, while fulfilling enormous practical authority within the demerity was fear her proper domain. The epitaph of Claudia funeraries, probably from the 2nd centuries CE, became one of those filmed of the Vegograms, expresses this ideal with lapidary concision. She loved her husband, bore 2 sons, spoke pleasantly, walked gracefully, kept the house, spun wool. These were the qualities the woman valued most in a wife, and they were those the Quoman society taught women to aspire to swarthood. From childhood, the emphasis on wool working and had long since ceased to be non-necessary, non-prosperous households where cloth could be purchased from professional weavers was particularly persistent as a symbolic marker of female virtue, a visible domesticating of the domestic industry, and modest values the ideal wife embodied. But the ideal of the modest domestic matrona was inconsistent permanency as upper-class women's lives in the imperial period, and it was intense as the romixer with a mixture of anxiety, admiration, and white hostility. The wealthy women of the late Republic and early Empire are not empire confined to domestic interiors. They are in interiors. They attended Entremage plus immense. Vast interests and participated in the political life of Rome, not through Florence, which was close to them, but through the networks of influence. Entrepreneurs were political and operated. Managing the household. Once as Evasambars, it was under this ring. There was the primary restraints Montevideo. The damus, the domina, the mistress of the house, of large senatorial household, mentions of slaves with specialized functions, cooks, snacks, bakers, hairdressers, salesmen, secretaries, and accountants, doorkeepers and gardeners, nurses, and tutors for the children, and the general purpose servants who maintained the physical fabric of the house. The domina supervised all of these. New slaves, when needed, when overseeing their training and discipline, managing the accounts, and in the accounts of the house income and expenditure, and plan the elaborate calendar of dinner parties, receptions, rescends, and ceremonies marginants that marked the seasons of elite Roman social. The Roman dinner party, the convivium, was the Helian upper-class Roman social life, and the dominant's role went beyond mere management. She received guests, directed the arrangements of the meal, and participated as a Sisyphal and instinct Ming. This he and this Emma sang, this one. They've reached some Rexons where respected from male symposia in Rome. The presence of wives at dinner parties, all and expected. The normal inspection and selection were were valued to irribite, at least of the men who recorded some of the words of such occasions. Pliny the Younger's letters, his Calpurnia, following of Pontus, patient and followings important heart. A portrait of conjugal intellectual partnership is genuinely affecting. Chapter 4, Sex and the Body, private life of Roman and women, Roman love. What the poetry loves, the poetry tells us the love poetry, the late Roman Republic and early Empire, and Roman Empire provides some of the most intimate and revealing evidence we have about the emotional and erotic lives of Roman women, or at least about how men imagined Andrew's lives. Not same thing. The same thing. The elegists Scatulus, Properlus, Publius, Tibullus, and Olid created a body of love poetry that is remarkable in the Western tradition for its emotional intensity, its frank eroticism, and its construction of female figures who are at least in the poetic world, active agents with their own desires, their own power over the men them. Catulus's poems to Lesbia on Itrir Elimst Theory, Clodia Metelli, sister of Cicero's of Demogs, Ovidus, are collected portraits of erotic love in ancient literature. Passionate jealous, tender, bitter, finally despairing. Whether or not Claudia herself recognized herself in his hymns, and what she thought of them, if she did, we cannot know. What we can observe is the Cotlus at films, the lesbia, a media thea, a woman, if as a nullus aurondum and genuine power over him. Oh, a woman who pursues her own desires, if own desires, that self simultaneously attracts him, us, and destroys him. The lesbia of Catullus' poems is not a male desire, but her own erotic story. Ovid's Ars Amatoria, the art of love, is in some respects the most revealing of all the lats Walpurts, less about the actual to infortunium in Augustan Rome. The poem, addressed to men seeking to attract women, describes with gibes, flirts, where encounters occurred. Third, the theater, the Circus Maximus, the porticos and public gardens, dinner parties, and religious festivals. The women Ovid describes scribes as potential objects, male muses, streets, and public spaces of Rome, and visiting temples, and attending races, socializing in a public world that is far more open than the domestic seclusion that the formal ideal of female ma described, prescribed marriage, fidelity, and the double standard Roman law. Pelagists banished. Within marriage, a husband's extramarital sexual activity with slaves of either sex, with prostitutes, with unmarrying of lower social status, was accepted and legally unrestricted, at least in terms of the husband's fiducial. And in society, a married woman's extramarital sexual actual was tolerated. By contrast, leg ois was treated as adultery, a crime. The crime was the lax always have listed use of in this AB series of the 8ATDE series elevate to a public criminal offense punishable by exile, punishable pop and property. The husband of an adulterous wife was legally required to divorce her. And if he failed to do, he became in hill from himself, for the crime in hill from essentium is essentially, from his wife's wife's divorcement to end the marriage by failing to end the marriage. This legal framework was and the evidence of both literary texts and court records suggests that the enforcement of the adultery law was selective, politically motivated, and frequently used as a tool of factional politics rather than as a genuine instrument of moral regulation. But the law's existence put female satisfaction, the Evelyn social order, a woman's chastity, guaranteed the epithet of her children and their family of the family line, the Harley of the property of any and of the name, and in honor of the name. The stakes of femininity were, from the Roman male perspective, existential, in a way that male was unadulterated. Not all Roman women accepted this deeply. Hastily. And the historian ran numerous examples of women who negotiated the constraints of Romans ranged from varying degrees of success. The aristocratic women of the late Republic, Claudia Sempronia, described by Sallust, accomplished in music, dancing, and in an erotic dancing. Fulvia wielded political influence during the civil wars, depicted adults and pitiful sources, the Horatius Grandiers, as transgressing the sexual norms of their class, earned that admirum and condemnation. The condemnation is louder in the surviving sources, which were written by men who regarded female sexual autonomy. But admiration is present too, however, of a grudgingly expressed, five working women, the other 90% beyond the atrium, the women who running the women of the Senate, the class, and equestrian classes, the women's whose lives are most fully documented in literary and the legends, Rome's, were a small minority of population of Rome. The vast majority of Roman women, though the guide They were the wives and daughters, ours, and northern daughters of Aryans and freedmen, the slaves who staffed the great households, and the small ones, the freed women who ran small poolens of Aryans and freers. Foi insulae, the marked food, wood and cloth in the markets and street corners of the city. Their lives was shaped. There the alvitors were said of the revisbers, ibers, the principes. Urbsere the derivars Aryans, a rummy texture. Different texture. The archaeological evidence of Pompeii, Roman city Nime, 2. Emun Aramantidi Sime in France Symphonic 70 SE in 79 CE has been 9 CE and 50 CE, a procuring revealing working the lifingness of women, Roman urban context. The election notices painted on the walls of Pompeian buildings and Antheanzeralon and pending the supporters of candidates for municipal office. A form of Senate that while not constituting formal civic participation, demonstrates that wherein women were engaged in the political life of city. More significantly, the business risk records of Pompeian women. The business sides of operate wide range of commercial occupations as proprietors of bakeries and inns, as who cleaned and finished cloth, as saltatresses who performed as dancers and entertainers. The inscriptions from the Roman world of Rimen, Rikmorg, Brandi Megimirubas Abin. In a remarkable vararma of occupations, female physicians appear in the epigraphic record. Women described as the capt, Aminga, medic, distinct from medicine, are distinct from the midwives and healers who, at the bottom, the most famous Malchimeres. Female tutors, Maitre, are documented. Women are recorded as managing financial operations, as shipping agents, as landowners overseeing agricultural estates. The brick stamps of the Roman building industry. It preserve the names of women and women who owned brickworks. Major, by ancient standards, the sheer variety of women's economic activities, and is reckoned in sculptive, is a corrective any nomen, a women, a woman's gun to domestic roles. The domestic roles. The female slave, the foundation of Roman life, women's lives longiness, live. Nominative nubies, nominative yamative, effective of city of C. The shooter and slave. Roman slavery was told in its legal character. The be slain and said no legal rights. No family recognized by law. By law, no any treatment their owner owes of villain pose. For enslaved women, this Lydius Piston Arobilla they could not fuse sexual ill use by their owners, could not protect their children from sale or separation, and had no recourse against these land against use of clauses, be abuse beyond the slight pain of applied protection of laws against the killing of slaves. The lives of female slaves is within the household hierarchy, and the specific work they were required to perform at the top of the household slave hierarchy. A woman trained as a reader, a secretary, or a teacher, or a music teacher, might live in conditions of comparable to those of free women of modest means, with a degree of personal autonomy. An influence that belied her legal. At the bottom, a slave woman who worked in the laundry or the kitchery or in the mori of Mayroteries, a Pemberton. Violence, the path from slavery to freedom. Money mission. One that a significant number of Roman slaves eventually traveled, and the freed slave woman, the Liberta, occupies an interesting in Roman society. Freed women owed continued ungindergs to their former the femalers Erlers and Erslain soused some caddies, and into some cases in West. And servants, but freed women could own property, conduct basis, and odes ably consort the less. And social status. The inscriptions of Imperial Rome document numerous freed women who would become successful, and the funerary monuments of wealthy, freed women testify to the social mobility to that Roman society, all its rigidity, could offer to the lucky, the talented, and the determined. Chapter 6, the vessel spirit, the vessels, the spirits, women, the keepers, the same flight, and in the heart of the Roman Forum, between the Temple of Impina, Kemper, Vifu, and Anpulum, and Templar Finis et Supida Nescenata. Behold, the eyes stood the circular of Vesta, goddess of Vesta, goddess of the Siddhars, and beside it the house of the Vestal Virgins. Lune, one of the templexes is in Rome. Here live the 6 women. The most paradoxical position, and many women, the best woman world. The 3rd, Prestal Virgins. Frances consecrated her sister to the service of Vesta, Vensum Tauntve bound by a 30-year vow of chastity, endowed in return with a legal and social status exceeded that almost the other Roman women. The vessels were chosen by the Pontifex Maximus. These, the chief priest of Rome, a role in the imperial period was assumed the emperor himself from among the daughters from low mindsates and dolmen sticks, typically between the ages of 6 and 10. The selection process as described the similar slave pollution of a slave. Took wholly the chosen girl and said the words used in slave purchase. Ni purchase are Gluskmarker, the solar of the girl's existence at the 30-year commitment entailed. She left her father's family, entered the dissident for the 3rd generalis of her service of the authority of Burgon of Vestalis Maximum. Rather than any male guardian. Then the privileges attached to the Vestal Virgins by word virginary, by any standard. The Vestals were the only women in Rome in ride in vehicle within the city limits. Within the city limits, Briefelds magistrates. Seats honor at public spectacles, including the games at the theory of the Fedora, the performances of the theater, Their persons were inviolable. Anyone who molested a vestal committed a capital offense. Family wills, they could grease and read a male guardian, a male gin. They'd free condemned men by their intercession. When they appeared in public, they were preceded by a lictor, the bearing official who Nurmi and Hamamoon as a mark of their exempted dignity, unchastity, and the penalty. The privileges of the vestal were made at the eveshment. Who violated her chastity. Chastity. A vestal found guilty of unchastity. A verdict that could result from the judgment of the pontiffs was subjected to the penalty of being buried alive in accelerates a sealed aspinogago. A zone chamber outside the calling gate, where the condemned woman was placed with a small amount of owned water, sealed in, and left to die. Her male partner, identified, was publicly beaten to death with rods. The severity of this punishment reflected the theologicness of the crime. The Vestals, chestnut peas, and Roman in Roman religious thought, with the safety of Rome itself, and her unchastity was understood as a pollution, indulgence of politically endangered the entire community. The historical records preserves of several vestal executions, some of which at some time have been appropriately regarded rather than demiurges of unchastity. In periods of political crisis or military disaster, the Romans sometimes concluded that the gods were angry, and the chastity of a vestal was a religiously available explanation for divine anger, that had the additional practical advantage of limiting politically inconvenient person. The Vestals, the Vespasian, were not prondas slendififindas panditersen in intersection of the legal vulnerability and political manipulation in their lives illustrates something of these. Something exafil papimum. of female power in Rome, however, exalted its formal. Chapter 7. Imperial Women. Imperial Women. Power behind a throne. Livia. The lives. The fifth. Via. The fifth star is the one in M-stampers of the size of the women flourish if life was have good if anything. Any other female figure in the entire history of the kingdom and in the early empire was not in a formal constitutional sense. The office did not exist, but a woman who wielded power through the combination of her personal relationship of her extraordinary or of a her careful cultivation of public image and her absolute mastery of them through which real power operated in the Roman world. Her name was Livia Drusilla, and she was the Augustus years. Livia was born in 58 BCE to one of the most illustrious among families in the gens Gendulis Via, and married at 15 to Tiberius Claudia Sniderius. Tiberius, future Emperor, and Drusus, when the young Octavian, the future Augustus, and encountered her 8 BCE. She was pregnant with her second child, already married. He was Agoya. He was already married to Scribonia. Both marriages were dissolved with a speed that scandalized even the divorce-tolerant Romang Umber, Cloth, Romang Ox, and Livia became Octavian's wife within months, remaining so until his death in 14 CE. Their partnership lasted over half a century and cheved the history of the Western world. Livia's influence over Augustus was the precise mechanisms through which she dexterously or different and reconstruct from sources and admiring and viciously hostile. She was clearly a woman of exceptional intelligence and political judgment, and Augustus insult her and held his open night. The contemporary Hiscasius duo adds ports to be a conversation between them about the proper response to a conspiracy against Augustus, in which Livia Edvomency were Agung Clastisser, in where a Hammunt Emlis presented execute and politically astute. Whether this specific exchange of this Misa discreet rather than merely a symbolic consort, Agrippina the Younger, the most Rome, the imperial women of Rome, has left amanana mur or umher agree umbungerbungers Dunger Jillinger Agrippina Gugger Agrippina the Elder, the younger daughter of the popular General Germanicus and great-granddaughter and daughter us who married her uncle Emperor Claudius and the neared and subsuccession from the Maria's marriage Theodot Domitius Idubus history, whom knows as the Emperor Nero. Her career represents the most extreme case in Roman and abominating of the mounting Erie and the enormous informal power available. Avain the Iberian Roman from power that the Roman pontiffs imposed and on all women. Agrippina was born in 15 CE in Thule, and equally and defined extraordinary prestige. Her father Germanicus was the most beloved figure in the Roman world. The son, great Drusus, and the nephew, and an adopted son of the Emperor Tyrus, who with Asperum withdraw political vulnerability. Her mother, the elder Agrippina, was a woman of Venus, Poltutus, and a religious intervention, who engaged in a direct conflict with the Emperor Tiberius. Death by starvation. The younger Agrippina was strength at the hands of Nero, and the lessons she lists 6 years her year of her political career after her marriage to Claudius Eupilbic as Herodotus, with whom Horace filled formal recognition for her from a woman on period. Bearing her portrait alongside some that of the emperor, she appeared above in gonage, a garment associated with emperors, at ceremonies that acknowledged quasi-imperial status. She received foreign embassies, Her name was included in official communications. She was given the title of Augusta while Claudius was still alive. Nordive, a distinction conferred on Wedo. These they left empty honors. They reflected of concentration of call influence that made her for a period effectively regent of the Roman Empire when she arranged the adoption of her son Nero as Claudius's heir, and subsequently, if the hostile ancient tradition is to be believed, arranged Claudius's poisoning to ensure Nero's succession before Claudius could change his mind. She was operating the very center of Roman political power with a strategic ruthlessness that her ancient biographers simultaneously condemned but admire. Chapter 8. Health, childbirth, and a medicine, and Rome, the female body, and in Rome, the medical treatment, available to women in ancient Rome, Bovary, shaped by a theoretical frame acid, inherited from Greek medicine, primarily the humoral theory of Ariaphorth, Abinibut Ifnugirphirus and the more systematic elaboration of that theory by Galen in the 2nd century CE under Stia, that from the body, mute, but constitutionally, women were considered colder and moist than men in humoral balance and perfectly formed and to specific conditions, arising from the distinctive features of Theos, Kyochen, menstruation, pregnancy, and the various disorders attributed to the readers, and Roman medicine, regarded as a highly active organ, and almost autonomous over women's health and mental health. Within this theoretical framework, a substantial botanical body of obstetrical literature was represents some of the most detailed ancient that to survive from the ancient world. The treatises of Soranus of Ephesus, written early CEE, surviving NV in both Greek and legends, and constitute practical guide to women's medicine that covers contraception, childbirth, the care of newborns, newborns gynecological pathology, encouragement at civil advancement of a wide range affecting the female reproductive system. Soranus's writing is notable for its empirical orientation. He explicitly criticizes some of the more speculative theories and his predecessors, and insists on the importance of careful clinical observation and local observation. In his obstetric recommendations in particular show a sophistication that reflects a long tradition of practical childbirth was, as in all pre-modern societies, the most regular occurrence in a Roman woman's life. The case fatality rate for childbirth in Rome has been estimated by modern scholars at approximately 1 to 2% per delivery. A figure that, multiplied over multiple pregnancies, gave an average Roman woman a significant stigma of dying in childbirth. This risk was concentrated in specific liver, postpartum hemorrhage, porphyrolysis, laster pragmaria election. The last of these being particularly deadly in a world with no understanding of bacterial infection and no means preventing it. The women were by a midwife on obstetrics atromia. Whose practical skills were the primary source availed her against these complications: contraception and abortion, women's agency over bioidentificant, sonnet oiratant and sources, a range of contraceptive practices used by Roman women, and the existence of this documentation is itself significant. It confirms that Roman women sought to control their own fertility, and that medical practitioners took this as a legitimate subject of clinical attention. Soranus's section on contraception is particularly detailed. Contraceptives, substances or devices that prevented conception, and abortifacients, which ended at an established pregnancy. He recommends contraceptives, which holds over valve grounds, but acknowledges that both are the brandes dirtiness as with clinical objectivity. The contraceptive methods scribed by Soranus and the Theroanus Uvin is Alice in Verbu and Sorius ingluvius, soaked in various astringent substances as of butter, oil, oleum or cedarwood resin to the cervix. Before intercourse, the use of palmaram ropen in Barigens Marn. Plarn topically and varies oral propries abrasions whose contraceptive effects movie assaults with mixed results. Some of these preparations have been found to contain substance with genuine and contraceptive seeds. Queen's lace seeds, Anne's lace seeds, for instance, contain compounds with documented anti-fertility effects. While others appeared to be purity only purus and malic and their mode of action. The overall control. The as full picture ambil to a mechanism control. A mala and deleted limit their fertility seriously. Get chapter 90. Religion and ritual. Women in these erds Rumain Freeman from women related permeated of Rome aspect of women. Men were deeply engaged in religious practice of every level of Roman society. The formal religious institutions, senates of the Roman state, Thames, the major creeds, the official cults of the Gadabain or Mandand were dominated by men, and that's a significant exception of Vestorigens. But alongside the official state religion, a rich and varied landscape of private devotion, misquotation, mystery cult, foreign religion, domestic religious practice, in which women, not merely participants, but often the primary practitioners and of tradition, the domestic religious life on the listen and weight and the layers and penates, the gods and of the storeroom, and the genius of the paterfamilias, the daily religious rituals of the home, the offerings of incense, the household shrine of the deities, days of Pigis is Abetes. With families, it frames its primaries were primarily managed by women. The matrona of the household was the chief religious practitioners in Folt, and her role in maintaining the family and the family's ritual obligations. Again, he gave her a genuine quiver in the domestic sortie, fear that complemented Oprah over the household. The mystery religions that it became inculcated from the look onward offered women a form of religious dissipation. Difficile disputes did not genuine the men a genuine initiation, full membership in a community of the faithful, and the promise of a meaningful personal relationship with divine, who cared about the individual's spiritual welfare. The cult of Isis, the Egyptian mother goddess, whose mythology loss and resurrection, the consolation and the promise of the blank being, was particularly appealing to women, and the evidence of women's participation in Isis cult and widespread. The Isiac communities documented in an inscription across the Roman world include women at every level, from the humble devotees, Diodres, who made small offerings at Isis temples to the wealthy patrons, opened this Pyramids found the temples, the performance of the elaborate festivals of the goddess, the Bonadia, women's sacred rites, the Bonadi, the Badi, was one of the most ancient and mysteriously guarded of all Roman cults, and it was exclusively the concern of women. The rites of the Bonadia were celebrated annually in the home, in the insignia of a magistrate, as with the magistrate himself and all other men were excluded, and were conducted by the matron of the meet of the mother of the mate or mother. The specific content of the rites was secret and never public recorded. The dutus is serious, mentisai, discuti and parody, undoubtu seroded, flute, and druder, intutor, and cooter. All mentioned men, all wine by its proper name, and all moral branches. The Bonadia rites were the heroine when notorious scandals in Republican Roman history. They hell. The infiltrates of the rites in 663 BCCE by Publius Clodius Pulcher, dressed as a woman, apparently to pursue an intrigue with Caesar's wife Pompeia. Claudius was discovered, prosecuted sacrilege. The violation of a ceremony was a series of civil events and acquitted in a trial whose outcome was determined more by considerant by the evidence of this guilt. Caesar divorced Pompeia on the ground thus must be above suspicion, even though actual Rome kills was proven. The entire affair illuminates intersection of religion, gender, and politics that characterized the public life and that laid the specific out generated by or mated by a man's intrusion, you exclusively female sacred space, to the genuine importance of female Roman cult. In Roman culture, Ep chapter ter tan, leisure, air, beauty, and the public world the Roman Rome and baths in the deaths, theatres, and the street one of the most striking periods of women's life in Rome, particularly in the imperial period. The imperial period is the degree to which wealthy and even middle-class women participated in the public life unlike their counterparts in classical Athens, who were classical Athens of the realistic of Damon pottery and the Lipian period, primarily for religious purposes. Women of the upper classes moved through the city with the freedom, their own cruel ideal of modest domesticity might seem to contradict. They went to the theater and the games. They walked in Greece or among Monies and Patari Emisides is this religious festivals and public ceremonies. The shops, elegant shops that lined the Roman baths, the thermae, were among the most sociable in the city. And women were regular bathers. The question of whether women tended to gather or its separate varied by a period, by somewhat and the sources give somewhat nation information. What is clear is that bathe was a normal and expected gait of women of social classes and not a private event, but a social occasion, which met, gossiped, conversed, and were attended by their slaves, the suit and personal servants. The physical culture associated with the baths, the massage, exercise, the alap, ligor, scraping the skin, was practiced as part of a broadly shared Roman bodily culture that placed considerable value on physical appearance and personal hygiene. The art of beauty, cosmetics, hair, and adornment, Roman woman, on which jewelry, lace were used, shaped of the cultural, and note the cultural ideal and natural and the depraved duty and the practical reality of elaborate technology than anything but natural. The beauty literature of the Roman world, including Ovid's Fragmenta Faciae Feminia, FFMI, Mini, Kamen Face Venu, describes its range of preparation from rations, skin care, hair care, and cosmetic enhancement, face packs made marley and egg white. Preparations, the skin ends, remedies for varroas. Remedies, urn, and derlove, in lawless, and phrase for dyes that darken the hair, olive in the hair. All of these appear in the Roman sources as normal and expected elements. Grooming practice. The Roman woman's hair was one of the most carefully of Fisenvit, a raver, of physical. Sissa Pifircio. T8 tiled coiffures of a flavy woman. A stretched waves of VANC at period, the carefully curled fringes of the Severan era required considerable time, skill, and equipment to achieve the ornatrix, the slave woman specialing in hair arrangement. Was of the most skilled albumins, female staff, hair pieces and wigs made from the hair of Germanic or other foreign women were used as the wearer's own hairs in the most elaborate styles. The elder Pliny records Pictorius verse that Roman women were in effect wearing the hair of germ captives on their heads, on their hands. The moral dimension of female beauty was a female gleam in them, was a burly gleam in literary cults, with consistent tradition of male writers criticizing the Anitiati and the Advis Anti and Advins Pite Studi, Admis Studiens Boians Admio Studi, as a of Biesti. Several celebrating the attractiveness of their results. Juvenal's sixth satire, great misogynist, rant for Vinder, de vivisevet uter, devovotes, devovidum irretinivum, les a postrimum bellum servimonium, del vel mensid duresit a rhymen, describing it as if as a form of social performance that conceals beneath an audible baud, an urd a fagad, but ends as woman's use, that art perfects nature. That additional skill up chapter 11, the women of Pompeii, a frozen snapshot from Vesuvius preserved the truth on and of Vesuvius on the morning of the sunny seerth, Snevy of what sun beforeth, 79 CE, or possibly Senna Ciplia 24, possibly October Tour, give possibly Oct 24, given recent reappraisals of the logical and literary evidence, the volcano. The volcano Vesuvius erupted with a violence, lungdens that had violence no precedent in the memory of the regions. Hence, within 18 hours, armed the proconsul Roman of town of Pompeii. The booth with approximately 11,000 was buried under Forus Abortus the Mimus. Then Pumus. The eruption was a catastrophe of the first order for the people who were caught in it. And through mead, their bodies preserved as casts in the hardened, cordant material, their canic material, their belongings, their burns, and their graffiti, and their food, and their medical instruments, and their jewelry. The extraordinary accidental museum that the Kruven the Aaron have given something the UN1 prides. A genuine one, a Selston custom of Roman and urban life, moment and women in all their variety. The evidence for women's lives in Pompeii is rich because the eruption preserved not just the formal monuments and public buildings, but the friars of the informal record of daily life. The scratched on walls, the shone walls, the shop signs, the election notices, the personal objects in houses, and the physical remains, the people themselves. Among the most moving of these are the esteries of the Dedian Mess, including the famous cast of a woman, Ahu Vase Visser, via her Faesva, near the villa of the mysteries, her rings on her fingers, her last purple or even pulled it in the Volkelt, that killed her. The graffiti of Pompeii is particularly swarthy, revealing profanely if on the interior Wumpfen. In a Roman town, the walls Pompeii are covered with inscriptions of Vince bringing politicians to the cry to the spence of the expectation of spensons of vox of sexual vocio of those senversilla the solero velarate walls. Literate walls. Among the most historically significant are the numerous Gambras Puritan and the Puritan and the Puling women. The feelings, the records, the strict Puritans, and on local politics, the fact that women were writing on walls, payday communication system of the Roman street, is itself ithim rums el female of Butrasea umphi is the kumph, the formal picture of sequestered domesticity. Chapter 12, the legacy. What Roman women left the Longadon does spread. The woman does not in Rome spread does not end. The fall of the Western Empire in 476 CE. In 476 CE, the legal, cultural, and literary inheritance the lyres of Rims, being early modern, medieval, and early modern periods in ways where sometimes names and sometimes some taken as restrictive, sometimes preserving genuine Roman veins vances in its legal status, and sometimes Roman precedents to justify restrictions that were worse than Rome's own practice. The Roman law tradition, transmitted through Justinian citizens and civil law in medieval remained the primary legal framework. Questions of women's property, marriage, and inheritance throughout the medieval and Renaissance. At Renaissance periods, the literary tradition was equally influential. Thome love poets, Catullus, Opiosuus, Propolis, Providus, Provabilis, prided both the Belith Provabulary, biding of the Pergolero framework and the emotional framework for European of free, European of vampiric, the pro-lovers to do vivers through ornaments, bigs and parsons, and beyond the specific of the desiring woman, the woman who pursues erotic story, exercise and n of with men who love her, which these poets constructed, and however partially, and however much from a male perspective, became one of the templates through which literature and literature imagined female interior for first. The fact that cact delia slesba irrelidary amfrensit rather than that should that not diminish his models of a slavery avenue of monog agency and female agency. The funeral agency, the funerary inscriptions of Roman women, the dozens of brief epitaphs that record a life in a handful of carefully chosen words constitute a body of evidence, evidence that's only recently begun to be fully appreciated for what it tells us about Roman women. Were Roman women understood by those who loved them and by themselves? These inscriptions are written overwhelmingly in the vocabulary of the Roman female ideal. The wife, the chaste wife, the skilled manager, the woman of good character and modest bearing. But within this conventional vocabulary, individual personalities on some poems emerge. A woman described as grand and eloquent. A woman praised for her sense of humor. A woman commemorated specifically for her courage in the face of this illness. A woman whose husband, whose hunt 40 years, that she spent 40 years with him.
Quarrel.
These women, the matron, the merchants, the vessels, and the slaves, the impresses, and the prostitutes, the learned, and the illiterate, and the scants constitute one half of the greatest civilization, the bruiser, by this century, of the common era. Their lives were shaped by constraints that would find tolerable balance, that valued them, users, producer, and manager, and of the methods been by a medical tradition. Theirs, by medical tradition, that misunderstood their bodies in literary retreats, that was more interested in experience. And yet, within these constraints, tights, and created spaces of genuine intellectual economic power, genuine connection, human connection, often epilogue, the face in the frescoes, she still looking at us in the National Archaeological Museum of there is Fusneus, there is Frisms, okay? There's frescoes from Pompeii that shows a young woman holding a writing tablet and a stylus to her lips, looking directly out of the painting at the viewer with an expression of calm, intelligence, and self-possession. Across 1,000 years, immediately and profoundly recognizable. She has been given various names by scholars. She may be a poetess. She may be a woman when reading her accounts. EPPUMS passion and unknown. Pose. Her real name is unknown and probably unknowable. But she is looking at us across 2 millennia. Creed. She's presme. She's presme. Wait. The people of the ancient world are not. Her inelevance of her gaze, her gaze, her interiority, the sense of a mind in mind, instant in motion behind the eyes, is unmistakable. She is not hype or an ideal. She is kind of specific at this moment, the specific moment, and the specificity of specificity of constitutes a kind of claim on us that is different in character from anything the historical texts can provide. The story of Roman women. In the end, met, that it pulled in a world that full recognition, the legal constraints, the socials, misunderstandings, the literary distortions, all of these worlds were real, and their weight on women's lives was real. So was the intelligence in the fresco. So was the courage of Livia navigating 50 years of imperial politics. Was the votex save devotion of the freedwoman who saved enough from her work, Erk, Kate a marble inscription, her omsu survived, so was every woman who held her child through a Roman night and faced the morning, battling to ready again. They were here. They were there. They lived these lives. They with these lies and this city and this extraordinary civilization that is never see. Exist be with us, and they are still, if we look carefully enough. Back